Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon.
Hello, everybody. Now is the time to put on those headphones. They should already be on. All you have to do is put them on your head. You should be able to hear. If something happens, please just raise your hand and we'll help you out. So thank you all for coming this morning, our proud 9 a.m. crew. For our event, It Takes Two, the role of public and private sectors in mobilizing capital for the just energy transition. And it's our honor at the U.S. Center to kick us off today, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for International Trade and Development, Alexia Latortu.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and good morning indeed to this very special group. We're going to have a great, intimate discussion, I'm sure. So to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change and to foster growth that's resilient, inclusive, and sustainable, emerging markets must urgently accelerate their transition away from fossil fuel energy sources and towards clean energy sources. To help countries with their transition, we need better technologies, better policies, new skills, and yes, lots more financing. And so the United States has been working really hard, including through multilateral and bilateral financial institutions, to increase climate flows significantly. And we're starting to see some results. We're pleased, for example, that we will achieve President Biden's commitment to quadruple international climate funds from the United States to $11 billion a year. But the hard work must continue, as we know that the needs far exceed the progress we have made. And we simply cannot achieve our energy transition and climate resilience goals without harnessing the trillions of dollars and know-how of the private sector. And that is why private capital mobilization is a significant U.S. priority. And Secretary Yellen has been very deeply engaged in this effort. She's convened the heads of the MDBs and the G7 leaders twice to press for greater ambition and urgent action. This is because she knows that it will take the public sector doing things differently to incite and help create the conditions for the private sector to come in. Now, we've identified 5 priorities for this work. Firstly, MDBs must have clear and ambitious mobilization targets to drive the culture and behavior change so that they see that part of their raison d'etre is to use their balance sheet and their expertise to catalyze the much greater flows of private finance. Secondly, we must overcome a highly imperfect data environment that limits the private sector's ability to evaluate risks as they pursue allocation and investments decision. I'm really encouraged by last month's release of the Global Emerging Markets Risk Database, or GEMS database, that I hope you're familiar with, that included greater disaggregation of MDB default and recovery rates by region, by sector, income level, country, currency, and contract type. Over the reporting of this last release that goes from 1994 to 2023, the average default rates in the database is 3.6%. And that's roughly equivalent to S&P's rated, B-rated or Moody's B3 rated company. So it's much lower than I think the perception is often of emerging markets assets. Thirdly, we must grow the pipeline of investable transactions. This requires devoting much more resources to well-run project preparation facilities. We're also very excited that the multilateral development banks have been developing new and innovative approaches to share or distribute their infrastructure assets, for example, to the private sector, thereby catalyzing more private investment by leveraging their comparative advantage in investment origination. IDB's new business model, backed by a $3.5 billion capital increase, is predicated on such an originate-to-share model. Fourthly, we must expand the availability, accessibility, and utility of a palette of risk mitigation tools to structure transactions that could attract the private sector. This ranges from guarantees, political risk insurance, credit enhancement, local currency solutions, and blended and concessional finance. The World Bank will be tripling its guarantee business by 2030 to $20 billion a year. And fifthly, we must continue to improve and support important work on strong macro fundamentals, sector policies, and the investment climate. These are bedrock, foundational issues for any country serious about attracting private sector investment. Now, to demonstrate tangible progress on how the public and private sectors can come together in very concrete ways, we've aligned these sources of financing in the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, or the JETPs. GFAN's banks have committed to mobilize over $17 billion towards Indonesia and Vietnam's energy transitions, complemented by over $17 billion in public sector financing. Now, these GFAN banks have been instrumental in organizing and amplifying the perspectives of commercial banks and financial institutions as countries work on developing their transition plans and building out their pipeline of projects. GFAN's also provided valuable feedback on the policy changes that could unlock their financing. Indonesia's recent revision of its local content requirement for the energy sector is a good example of a positive policy change. But the true magic about all of this is not just deploying private financing and public financing in parallel. It is to deploy financing in ways that can leverage the strengths of the public and the private sectors. For example, public sector money should be used categorically to enable private financiers to enter transactions that expand business as usual. We're trying to create such magic in Indonesia, in the Indonesia JETP, where about $6 billion in public and private money is in process. What I mean by that is the procurement process for the project has officially commenced, or there's an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, is in place between the government and a financier committing resources for project preparation on a specific investment. 2/3 of this $6 billion is expected to be either fully commercial or a blend of public and private financing. And we expect GFAN's banks to be part of several high-priority projects that are expected to close this year or early next year. Now, we've thought deeply about the lessons learned from this experience, and we've been working very closely with other countries in coordination with the multilateral development banks to work on a new country platform approach that will look more broadly at the energy transition challenges, going beyond the power sector to consider other energy intensive sectors such as transportation and industry. And we hope that this next generation of country platforms will also better leverage the expertise and the resources of the multilateral development banks, placing them in a leading coordination and technical role. We're also looking with very great interest at other country platform experiences, such as Brazil's recently launched Climate and Ecological Transformation Investment Platform, which is built on a strong policy foundation and also has a strong private sector focus. So with these words of introduction, let us explore the beautiful tango with the public and private sectors working in perfect harmony to help countries accelerate their just energy transitions, including through country platforms. All right, and so with no further ado, we're going to jump straight into this fantastic panel, where I'm really pleased to welcome Jay Collins, a very good friend of many of ours. He's the vice chairman at Citibank, representing the private sector perspective. Representing the public sector perspective, we have Ivan Oliveira, the undersecretary of the Brazilian Ministry of Finance, who obviously has done a lot of work on the G20 as well of Brazil. And unfortunately, our third panel member from the IFC had to depart Baku prematurely. So, Jay, I want to start with you. And I listed some of our priorities with respect to private capital mobilization around data, around risk mitigation instruments. I'd be curious for your views on our priorities. Do you have the same ones, different ones? Please be frank. And perhaps most importantly, are we actually making progress on these priorities?
Can you hear me okay, by the way? Great. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your partnership over the years, because it has been tremendous, and you do exemplify what you said about this critical relationship between public and private sectors, and listening, constructive feedback, an intent to really do the right thing so that we do mobilize more and get the MDBs to lean into to everything we're trying to do in development and climate finance. So I just wanted to thank you. Let me just give you just a quick perspective that's also topical now, which is that I would give the MDBs extraordinarily high grades on capital efficiency, on the fundamental progress toward reforms documented and laid out in the G20, and then with Ajay Banga's leadership and others, just really pushing the needle on capital. And you see that already in terms of what was announced of the, call it, $120 billion for low and middle income countries that's committed to. That's really pushing the needle on how they get there. I would also say that there is this great intent for PCM, for private capital mobilization, and I think that the biggest step that we at Citi are happy about, and spend a lot of time talking to MIGA about, is the MIGA platform on guarantees. And if, for those of you that aren't as familiar with finance, if you look at blended finance, if you look at mobilization, other than equity, the most important layer of that are guarantees. And if you get guarantees right, you can put a higher mobilization rate against everything. So we have to just applaud that effort. But that said, we're failing pretty miserably so far to deliver on private capital mobilization. And I think that one of the concerns that everyone should have reading the draft of the new collective quantified goal is how you could get to an outer layer, let's call it $1 trillion, from the $120 billion of MDB money, the $300 billion. Let's just say I have no idea what that'll ultimately be. I think none of us do, given the disagreements. But the way I think about it, and the way a lot of my colleagues in the private sector think about it, is that we're not in the negotiating track to deliver what is the provision or the official monies. All we know from the JET-P experience is if you don't understand exactly what is in there, bucketed, you don't really know what mobilizes. And I think if you take out, for example, adaptation monies, you take out kind of item monies, you take out nature, loss and damage, and you say what is left that really has a high mobilization rate, one has to do the math then to say, okay, with that, what's the mobilization rate to get to your outer layer of, call it, $1 trillion? And right now I would just say that's a stretch, right? It's very hard. It's going to require, extraordinary efforts. So in two of the buckets, and I'll be brief. I mean, one there is a let's just call it project development and enableization efforts, and monies to go to that. So we simply just don't have enough projects, right? And I just said this at a meeting that you and I were at with the head of the IMF and CEOs of the MDBs, that even if we got the trillion, there aren't enough feasibility study done projects in the world to get even close to that, and the enabling environment isn't ready. And so if you don't start with that, then by the time we talk about how much money actually will go into project risk mitigation, let's call it, that is efficient for pensions, insurance companies, and banks, then you didn't create that base foundation for success. And then the second component to this, which is critical, is fundamentally looking at the tools and the solutions of the MDBs that mobilize that actually have two things. One, that are designed to mobilize more and incentivize the system that those solutions have to change radically to get us to these ambitious goals, be they SDG gap or climate gap. But second, that we haven't really put, and I think if I look at it, Alexia, together, one of the most troubling components of this that is so technical that few people pay attention to it is the regulator hasn't been in the room. And by that, for those of you that don't follow this as closely, there are Solvency II in the insurance industry and Basel rules in and around how banks and insurance companies can participate in development and climate finance for weaker credit zip code emerging markets and infrastructure projects that are so important here. And those frameworks not only don't enable, but they inhibit the flow of money from the developed world to the developing world, from those institutions to the developing world, and they're very technical. They're the kind of technical features that if you're not in this very narrow Venn diagram of people that can structure and are bankers and understand finance, understand climate policy, and understand deep regulatory challenges and issues. And I will say, quite frankly, as just a city example, the number of projects, I ran infrastructure finance for Citi. I won't even tell you how long ago because it's kind of, you can see my gray hair. So, but a lot of bankers in the world that do project finance don't even understand the back end of the risk systems that have codified regulatory treatment in their institutions and how and why that was interpreted enough to understand why the models spit out regulatory capital returns that make projects viable or not. And so much depends on not how MIGA might see, for example, their guarantee, but how the treatment under Basel and Basel interpretation actually works at the back end to make a project viable or not. And so we really struggle, and the only way we're going to get there, I think, in the near term is to have a what I call a systemically responsible prudentiality framework around a dialogue with the regulator so that we understand that is the framework, but that we talk about these policy objectives, the bank's ability to get there, and the regulatory consequences and issues and changes that might be made.
Thank you so much. And I think Jay is one of the bankers who perhaps spends the most time with the MDBs, and I think you confirmed a lot of our priorities in terms of the importance of policy work, the importance of the risk mitigation instruments, but you added an important element to the table, which is the regulatory piece. So maybe we can come back to that. And you also said we have some of these tools, but the results are absolutely not where they need to be, is what I heard you say. Okay, so let's get a country perspective now, and someone, of course, from the public sector in Brazil. And I'd be interested, Yvonne, to hear from you. How do you try to create the magic in terms of using the public resources that you raise to try and unlock access to private, the much greater flows of private sector financing. And also, one of the specific concerns we hear from investors often is the risk of foreign exchange risk. And I know that you've done some innovative work with the IDB on that. Perhaps you could share that with us.
Thanks, Alexia. Always a pleasure to be with you. Let me start off by also thanking you for your partnership. Throughout the G20 presidency, it was really meaningful. And I'd say for some of the key deliverables out of our G20 presidency, in fact, you were together since the beginning. So for the MDB reform agenda and for the Green Funds agenda. So thank you very much. So yes, the agenda of FX is really important. We also have been talking about that in the G20, especially at the task force on climate. And one of the critical hurdles in order to really bring private sector to developing countries, especially middle-income countries like Brazil, is definitely, I'd say, FX risk. So it really encompasses maybe connecting different kinds of risks, and then you have there that single one that is really important. And so what we've been trying to do in Brazil, and we've been trying to also to bring to the G20 some ideas on how that could be replicated in other countries, and maybe thinking about innovative ways to deal with smaller countries, is together with IDB, we built the Eco Invest initiative. It has essentially two tracks. One has to do with blended finance mechanisms. Another one that has to do with FX risk mitigation. And the second one is essentially the Treasury coming together with the banks, IDB and the World Bank. And we're right now, by the Treasury, creating a mechanism where the currency fluctuation, if it goes beyond a threshold, the Treasury is going to cover that for the private sector that is investing in sustainable development projects in Brazil in the long term. So we're trying to deal with that long-term agenda, trying to smooth a little bit the fluctuations that we might have, and after a threshold, then the Treasury comes, and so it's pretty much a guarantee that Treasury is bringing together with the MDBs so that you come to Brazil, you invest in critical sectors in the long term, and you can have a better sense of how your cash flow is going to be in the years to come. We've prepared together with IDB this proposal also to the G20. It's there in the outcome document of the Task Force on Climate. And something that also came out is, all right, we can think about that in countries like Brazil, where we do have institutions, we have a strong treasury, but how about smaller countries where that's also quite important? So there was this idea, and Avinash Perso was the one behind it, on how we could think about a hub or a fund or something that could help, and then the MDBs could definitely have a very important lead here, those smaller countries to build similar FX risk mitigation initiatives, and again, try to boost private sector investments in their transition. So we're starting to see the process in Brazil right now. Let's see how things are going to move. Obviously, this is a very challenging global times, let's say. Our currency has been fluctuating a lot the last couple of months, in fact. And but there is also something that is really important here, is that this is not just an instrument that came out of the blue and it's there. There is a process, and this instrument is one of the many that the new Brazilian government is building up, connecting to what is going on when it comes to economic planning and climate planning in the country. So we have launched the Ecological Transformation Plan. The minister is leading that. We're kind of giving a north to where the government is going to be in this connection between economic development and climate. We have critical sectorial goals to meet. And we're right now at the sectorial level, so we have the Energy Transition Plan that should be out soon and is well connected to the Ecological Transformation Plan. Then we have the climate plan that is out. We have the new industry plan. So there's a lot going on in Brazil. But what is important is that we have started by replanning things, connecting economic issues to climate issues, and right now going deeper into policy issues. And together with that, thinking about innovative instruments that could help us out in really bringing international investors in. So maybe just one last point is, what is critical in this juncture is really how can we think about planning, policies, and platforms, right, as a process to really mobilize the private sector. So the public sector has a critical role here that is really, give the north, think about instruments, and really let the private sector do the great job that is necessary. Most of the critical job that we need in order to tackle climate change is going to be done by the private sector. And so that's where we're dealing with that in Brazil. So a new kind of PPP, programs, policies, and platforms.
No, that's great. I think there's been so much innovation in Brazil and so much ambition on climate that it's been great to see. I think you were also making the point that not every solution is going to work for every country. And so I think what you're doing on Forex, on foreign exchange, is really exciting for Brazil. As you say, I think that's going to be for the big emerging markets. I think for the smaller markets, we'll need other kinds of solutions. I might stay with you, Ivan, and you mentioned the ecological platform, as did I in my opening. And I'd love to hear a bit more about the platform, what the goals of it are, and why you thought this approach needed to be a platform approach as opposed to just a series of projects.
Great. Thanks, Alexia. This is also well connected to what's going on in the country and in what we were discussing in the G20. And I like to say that the way we framed our G20 agenda is really reflecting quite well what is going on in the country. So we could see a little bit, to the outside world, giving a little bit of what's going on in the country and how we could help with some solutions out of the G20. We've been discussing platforms for some time now. It's not new, but what is new and what we have been pushing there at the G22, at Task Force Climate, but also in our MDB agenda of reforms, is how could we think about platforms that are more effective, efficient, and well connected to the country's needs. So we've been pushing that. We got some inputs from experts, assessing the platforms that were out there, some of the problems they had. And we found out that maybe three critical pillars of those platforms, or the new wave of platforms that we could have, could be a very strong country ownership. They should be flexible, and they should be a point of connectivity. So strong country ownership, flexibility, connectivity as the key principles to build up new country platforms. So we have walked the talk, or the text, in that sense, after we delivered the TF Climate outcome. And in fact, we tried to use those principles and apply them to build up something to Brazil. That is, again, it is in this context that we have in Brazil now, with the ecological transformation plan, a lot of sectorial plans, the new climate plan. We have just launched our new NDCs. So how could we really, connect better to the world? And in here, what is essential is really private sector mobilization for transition in Brazil, having the platform perspective. So what is new about our platform and why we see it not as a model in itself to be just replicated by countries, but a model on how to build from inside out a platform that can be, hopefully, very efficient in mobilizing private sector money. First, we built the platform based on the plans. So again, we needed the plans and the policies that were building in Brazil in order to assess which sectors and subsectors we would like to have in our platform. So without that, we wouldn't have a clarity on what is strategic, what is not. So we had the ecological transformation plan, we're building up our energy transition plan, we have the new industry plan. So with that, we started to see, all right, so which sectors are really in most need of international money that are not being financed domestically the way, and where we really need to, have this specific target, bring it to a platform so that the platform can really help us mobilize finance for those, for projects in those sectors. So we have selected 3 key sectors, and then we have energy, but not only energy, we have industry, we have mobility, we have nature-based solutions, and bioeconomy. So we have 3 buckets, and out of those, we went to subsectors to see, all right, but in energy, for example, what is really relevant, to bring attention to the world, and where we need international money to come into Brazil. So we started to assess, together with the sectorial ministries, all right, for wind power in Brazil onshore, no, it's financed by the market right now. So we don't need that in a platform. But offshore wind is there. So we started to see which subsectors would really fit better. Again, well aligned to our planning in Brazil now. But so 2 very important criteria. One is the alignment to the planning. Another one is the need to mobilize international private money to make the projects come to fruition in Brazil. So we have a number of subsectors there in those 3 big buckets: energy, industry and mobility, and nature-based solutions. And then what we did, we built an interministerial committee led by the Minister of Finance. That's also new there. So we are leading from the Minister of Finance the whole process. We brought the Minister of Energy, we brought the Ministry of Environment, and the Minister of Trade and Industry. And together with them, we built the criteria that the Secretariat of the platform is going to use to assess the projects to see if they should go or not to the platform. But the Secretariat is going to run independently based on the criteria that we have set, and it's based in BNDES, but it's not only for BNDES, so BNDES is supporting us there. We could do something great with the GCF. For the first time, we are using the readiness program of the GCF to finance the Secretariat of the platform. Yes. So other countries could really do that tomorrow, and that's very innovative, and Mafalda was a great supporter. We could take the money out of the GCF in 1 month, so that's really good news about the GCF. And just one last thing. So we do see this value, in connecting the critical stakeholders in Brazil in the platform. So MDBs should be there. And we from the Ministry of Finance want to use the platform as a new way to engage with the banks. So instead of crowding out the private sector in Brazil, and some of the banks did that a lot, especially in the energy sector, we want the banks to crowd in, and maybe we want to push them to some of the critical projects that we have in the platform. We want to use the platform as a very important point to connect with the funds. So our GCF country program is going to be built out of the projects that we have in the platform. So we're using the platform to build our GCF agenda. Our agenda with the CIFs in the industry decarbonization program should also be built out of the platform. So it feedbacks to the government in a way that we can be more strategic with the funds, with the banks, and we can really, for the private sector, and hopefully, Jay, it's going to be important for Citi in Brazil and in other banks. We can say, look, this is a priority. This is a very critical subsector, and jump in and let's make a change in Brazil. Yeah.
No, perfect. And so let's go from one of the most recent country platforms to get, Jay, your perspective. You were there at the very beginning with some of the original energy transition platforms. What is your experience with them? What's promising about them? But also, what are the lessons learned as we think about the next generation platforms?
Great, thank you. And thank you, Ivan, because I think Brazil is just, showing the world the way in a lot of what you're doing that's so innovative and leaning in. So thank you. So let me give you just a couple takes on things that are so important about what's happening in country platforms and JETP, and then more importantly probably where we go from here and how we can do better. So first of all, if you go back to say Glasgow in South Africa, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the JETP process, but ultimately what we have shown through this is that the country platform approach is critical. And that the dialogue between the private sector and the official sector, including the MDBs, to to get to solutions has to be done through an organized framework. And so we may have a lot to work on, but fundamentally that platform approach that we've moved to now came out of the early, South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt days. Second is, I think we have learned that that the planning process that was missing prior to Glasgow, I would say even prior to Egypt, that came out of that, if you think of the energy plan in Indonesia, that without that, you didn't have the framework then for what has to happen. And so something as simple as, I remember my first wake-up call when I started giving speeches on you can't transition without transmission. That fundamentally our grids and infrastructure were so lagging and broken that all the talk about generation and renewable, wait a minute, that really, Alexa, I wasn't there intellectually until I looked at Indonesia. So that energy plan, a lot of value and really mapping out at the sectoral level what happens and how it happens. So there are other things, but let me just jump to some of what I think is, kind of constructive views going forward. First of all, I'm sorry, one more thing I want to applaud, because I think, Mark Carney and the leadership around the private sector directly, not through the MDBs, not intermediated, but directly to lay out what does it think about an enabled environment, and to put it in writing. Every country in the world that is ambitious, that really wants to attract not only FDI, but funds for their ambition and move the needle on ambition, you got to do that. That private sector dialogue to say, here's what it would take for me to do more. We're working right now with the city is working with a very ambitious country that has said, give us a 3-year plan to single A. And let's go through every single detail, not of what moves the rating agencies, but that fundamentally enables everything, green or otherwise, in FDI. That level of thinking that the private sector can add is game-changing, and that thought process to not rely on others' views other than the private sector itself on what really enables, and to say, if this is what you want, this is what you have to do, that thought process, and I just applaud again Mark and the team on putting us together to put that in writing and saying, do that and we will come. So the next thing is where do we go from here? What's a lesson learned? First of all, if you don't have the plan and you don't enable the environment, you're going to have a time lag. And I think if we look at how long it's taken in these efforts, we were too optimistic on speed, and we didn't synchronize well, right? So to be honest, the entire bank or funding community was doing intensive calls, let's call it 2 years of JETP calls, where bankers that do projects were on calls before the system was ready, right? And I know that sounds like, well, that's a pretty technical thing. But it isn't, actually. If we really want to make this work, we have to know when we have feasibility studies done enough, where you need bankers to come in, financiers or bank guidance early on, but light touch. But let's also be clear of when it is that we want to put people that structure money to put them in the room and kind of stagger the process better in these country platforms going forward. The other thing is, I love that what Dr. Al-Mashat and Egypt did in the NWEFI process of giving essentially a leadership role for a job to an MDB. So many of you wouldn't think that MDBs can be as competitive as the private sector, but guess what? They can be. But if you say, actually, you know what, in hydrogen, you, EBRD, you take the lead and you crowd in the other MDBs and organize us with speed and clarity of how we engage, what we do. That moved the needle so much faster than other processes. And so it sounds, again, simple, but it ended up actually unbelievably significant. And then I could probably, I could write, if I wasn't at Citi, I'd write a book on what we've learned. So I'm going to be brief. But the next thing I'd say is that private sector engagement in the platforms is generally lacking. And importantly, if you say in your minds, you should think we have a stock take to NDC gap, right? And it's pretty massive, and so my view is actually that's not the real gap. It's NDC aggregated ambition, reality adjusted gap to 1.5. And what's reality adjusted mean? So let me be perfectly honest. Most NDCs in the world were done by intense intergovernmental dialogue and have not had intense sectoral discussions around hard-to-abate utilities, energy, with their sector to say, if I'm closing the gap in cement and I've had this emissions target, is it actually doable? Well, wait a minute. If the public sector doesn't control cement and you didn't sit down and have very intense dialogue with the private sector on a sectoral approach, then how do you know? If you didn't talk to Lafarge, how do you know? If you sat down and said, actually, I think I'm going to move steel by X, and the country ministers and the teams looked at that and said, but you didn't talk to Nippon Steel about green steel, like, I'm sorry, but I can't probability adjust NDCs until you do that. And I don't want to do that for every country in the world. And you've heard me say that, and Specs heard me say that. The G7, I said over and over, I'm only saying, and I think I overstated in calling for sectorally determined contributions in Egypt a couple of years ago, because I don't think we can do this for every single sector. But for the highest emitters, if you don't do it, we will be massively wrong. And that means to connect the leaders, not the laggers or naysayers, in the sectoral approach directly to the countries that we need to move the needle and figure that out. And that, again, if we hadn't had this JET-P process, I'm not sure that would have come. It would have been so clear to me that the private sector, not as generalists, but with clear, think Poseidon principles shipping, or think steel, ambition metrics and ambition delivered to country ambition with technology and capital and enabling environment advice. That's the route to success.
That's fantastic. And with these two wonderful gentlemen, we could spend the entire morning, as you can tell. I think I just want to close out by saying maybe two things. The first one is, it takes two, and the it takes two needs to be early and upfront. You can't bring the partner at the end of the conversation. You need to start together in that, and really identify the opportunities, the challenges, and how that delicate tango is going to go. It's almost tango is a very rehearsed, very specific dance to execute. And I think all the time and your points on process that you made, I think confirms that if you really want the tango to be executed well. Second point is both gentlemen, both Jay and Yvonne, spoke a lot about planning. Because what we're trying to do with the just energy transition is actually a whole of economy transition. And so taking a project by project approach won't work. And they really stress the importance of having that plan that includes the voice of both the public and the private sector. So it's the public sector has the big ambition, but it needs to talk to the private sector up front to create those plans to have a chance of being successful. So I'm deeply grateful that Jay and Yvonne joined us this morning. Their two of the most proactive people in the space. So thank you very much to you. And beautiful audience, thank you for showing up at 9 a.m. and listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to the U.S. Center. Make sure you leave your headsets on the chairs. And make sure you come back again today. Our next event is at 10:15 on U.S. Industry Climate Solutions for Global Partners, featuring the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Export-Import Bank of the United States.
If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon. To adjust the sound on your headset, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Thank you for coming to the U.S. Center. Our next event will start soon. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being with us here at the U.S. Center. My name is Victoria Yu. I'm with the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we're really happy to be partnering with our colleagues at the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency for a second year in a row here at the U.S. Center to highlight what U.S. companies are doing as they're deploying climate solutions to our global partners and some of the U.S. government tools we have to support U.S. companies as they do business abroad. So I'd like to introduce Owen Hernstad, who's a director, a member of the board of directors with the Export-Import Bank of the United States, to get us started. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Victoria, for your introduction. What a special treat to be here at the U.S. Center today. During my visit at COP29, I have participated in numerous events and meetings that have been all focused on our shared goals and objectives. It's so great to be here at the U.S. Center, where I can proudly highlight the invaluable role of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, America's official export credit agency, and what it plays in our in financing climate solutions. Through collaboration with our counterparts across the U.S. government, the Commerce Department, DFC, the State Department, Department of Energy, USTDA, of course, and many others, we're working to level the playing field across many sectors in the energy transition. All of these agencies can be critical resources for many of our efforts, including early-stage financial support, such as feasibility studies, grant funding, and then as projects develop, financing from agencies like US EXIM. For those of you who don't know, EXIM has a single mission, and that is to support American jobs through facilitating the exports of goods and services throughout the world. EXIM makes globally competitive financing available to support the purchase of exports of American-made goods and services to clients around the world by offering direct loans, loan guarantees, and insurance products backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. We help to make sure that globally competitive financing is available to support the purchase of American-made goods and services. And I am proud to say that in line with our congressional mandate to support environmentally beneficial exports, EXIM has had record-level clean energy investments. In fact, EXIM more than doubled our investments in clean energy and other environmentally beneficial exports, growing from $1.1 billion in fiscal year 2023 to a record $2.3 billion in fiscal year 2024. These new investments, which represent over 1/4 of EXIM's transactions this year alone, supported $1.7 billion in clean energy and other environmentally beneficial exports, EXIM's highest ever levels. In fiscal year 2024, EXIM authorized $8.4 billion in deals supporting some 38,000 jobs across the U.S. Over the last decade, EXIM has provided $66 billion in support for more than 5,000 U.S. businesses, allowing them to achieve $101 billion in exports. EXIM is deeply committed to driving the global energy transition by advancing clean and renewable energy products, and at EXIM, we have $100 billion deployable dollars in capacity to dedicate to financing, and EXIM's charter, as I mentioned, includes a mandate to support environmentally beneficial transactions as well. In 2021, EXIM funded $11 million in climate transactions while supporting 50 jobs in the process. In 2022, the climate funding total grew to $175 million with 550 U.S. jobs supported. In fiscal year 23, EXIM funded well over $1.1 billion in climate transactions while supporting 4,700 American jobs. And in fiscal year 2024, a record level clean energy investments in line with our mandate, we have grown to a record $2.3 billion, EXIM's most ever. EXIM has been active in global markets through our embassy support to spread the word about EXIM financing and our commitment to U.S. exporters, from electrical net zero aircraft assembled in Vermont to minority-owned small businesses in Pennsylvania. EXIM is supporting small businesses exporting exciting new technologies and allowing U.S. companies to compete in the global market. We are open in basically all sectors, and exporters are eager to provide their expertise to support your infrastructure projects, and EXIM stands ready to utilize our financing tools to help get these critical projects underway. U.S. companies are vital partners in combating climate change and remain committed to investing in and deploying climate solutions that can help our trading partners meet their global climate ambitions. So now on to today's panel. This morning, we will focus on how U.S. companies and the U.S. government are deploying, are partnering to deploy clean energy solutions to meet the energy access, energy security, and climate goals in developing markets. And we've already started to discuss U.S. government project development tools, as I've just talked about, including export finance that are available. So whether you're a U.S. business seeking tools and resources to export, or a government or international company looking to partner with U.S. businesses to develop and implement clean energy products, there's something for you on today's panel. With that, I am honored to introduce Heather Evans, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Manufacturing for the International Trade Administration, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Herrenstadt, for your introduction. It's a real treat to be here today. I just arrived yesterday in Baku, and I've got lots of different events scheduled, but it's really exciting and fitting to start here at the U.S. Center, where hopefully we can really get a good start to my trip, at least, highlighting some of the roles that U.S. technology and innovation plays. I just have a few minutes of remarks, and then we'll get right to you, gentlemen, so don't worry. You're coming up soon. I did just want to say a little bit about the International Trade Administration, or ITA. So our mission is really to create prosperity by first promoting trade and investment, second, strengthening the competitiveness of U.S. businesses and workers, and then third, ensuring fair trade and compliance with U.S. trade laws and international agreements. And so that's really our three areas of focus. And we have a global team of 2,300 people strategically located all around the world. We have 100 different U.S. locations and 80 different international markets where we have our own staff. We have, I myself even have my own team of trade experts who really focus on trade policy, and we partner with other members to focus on promotion. And again, the whole focus there is supporting U.S. companies as they try to bring their innovative technologies, their services, their expertise to markets around the world. And 85% of the companies that we serve are small, medium, or even micro-sized enterprises. And the reason we're here at COP29 alongside other U.S. government agencies is because we know that we can't talk about economic prosperity without addressing climate change. It's one of the greatest challenges, maybe the greatest challenge we face this century. So it's really important, and from the Department of Commerce perspective, we're using all the tools at our disposal to help address the climate crisis. This includes leading clean tech-focused trade missions. We're focused on helping innovators protect their intellectual property. We are often doing a lot of research to help clean tech companies identify foreign markets with the high potential for exporting. And we facilitate foreign direct investment into the United States through our Select USA program. And we've also recently additionally started thinking about supply chain challenges and how we can understand supply chain dynamics and address those by establishing a new supply chain center that's also in the same part of ITA where I work. We do work very closely with Exim Bank and U.S. Trade and Development Agency. We'll hear from them later. And so I don't want to reiterate exactly the points that the speaker before me said, but just rest assured we're very much closely connected across the interagency, really looking at how the government can be all tied in, but we also know that we can't do it alone. We have to work with U.S. industry, and so we're really excited to be here at COP29 to highlight the U.S. industry innovation. Hopefully we'll be advancing public-private partnerships and really looking to deepen commercial cooperation with our international partners. So that will be, again, like the emphasis of my time here on the ground. I think we'll hear now, because I'm going to pivot to the panel, about some of the exciting examples that U.S. companies can share with us about how they're deploying clean energy solutions globally. And, whether you're looking, depending on whatever you're here for, I think we have something for you. So let's turn to the panel and get started. I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. So first, Roger, right? Roger Martella, Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of Global Engagement for Government Affairs and Policy with GE Vernova. Next to him is Mike Train, right? Yes. Chief Sustainability Officer with Emerson. Just making sure you're sitting in the same order that I thought. Matt Armstrong is next to him. He's the Vice President for Government and Public Affairs with Baker Hughes. And then at the very end is Rick Ziegler, Head of Trade and Multilateral Affairs with UL Solutions. So to kick it off, I'm going to ask you gentlemen to tell us more about your company's technologies and how you're deploying those solutions globally. So let me start with you, Roger. I know my team at ITA has worked with your respective team very closely, including with other U.S. companies to advance the deployment of, U.S. small modular reactors. Sorry, I didn't read ahead too far, including in Europe. Can you tell us some more about the examples of GE Vernova's small modular reactor successes in Europe or elsewhere?
Sure. Heather, thank you very much. And thank you to the Exim Bank and to the International Trade Association for all of the support. I think for the U.S. companies, we feel the support, we feel the love when we're abroad on how much you're supporting our efforts to help not only innovate and create jobs and manufacturing in the U.S., but really take our technologies and help put them, as you said, about prosperity. That's what we're all about, helping make sure everybody has the chance to live a prosperous life all around the world, and the role that you play is really critical to that. So GE Vernova is a company that was basically founded by Thomas Edison 130 years ago. When he invented the light bulb, he created the electrification revolution. And now we're at the onset of a new electrification revolution as we look to power the world as the world sees a doubling of need for electricity by 2040. But to your point about climate change being one of the imperatives to solve one of the world's most pressing challenges, we have a dual mission of electrifying the planet, but also decarbonizing the grid at the same time, so that as we put more capacity on the grid, we're lowering the carbon intensity of the grid, lowering the emissions, and that's what we're all about. We help power 25% of the world's energy. We have the most diverse portfolio of technologies, from gas to renewables to grid technologies. And you mentioned nuclear. And our investment in small modular reactors is really something that's having a strategic impact globally. So if you think about small modular nuclear reactors, what we're trying to do is come up with a common design. We're working on something, you don't have to build a new nuclear power plant everywhere you go, but you have a common design that can be readily replicated and used in a variety of settings. So we have been working on our own technology called the BWRX. It's the 10th generation of our very well-established boiling water reactor, and so it has a reliability of design, a reliability of fuels, a reliability of just being in operations. And we'll be the first to deploy this this decade, 2029, as we start to build our first facility in Canada. But we've been working very strategically with the United States to know the next generation of nuclear really makes a difference in the world. We have to be strategic about not just making this a U.S. technology for the United States, but that we have the benefits of SMRs for the rest of the world. So we're appreciative of the partnership with the U.S. to help us grow markets in Europe, for example. So in the UK, we're pursuing the Great British Nuclear Competition, where we're one of the finalists, and they've been supporting us with over $33 million to help fund the design. We're working with Estonia, Poland, OSGE, and Synthos, as well as other big collaborators and partners in Europe to make sure, again, we're not just developing something in the U.S. for the U.S., but we're building global supply chains, we're bringing in global opportunities, and we're helping to use this as a chance to help solve problems not only in the U.S., but in the countries we're working with. So thank you for the partnership there.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And as a follow-up, looking at Africa, where you have hundreds of millions of people that don't have access to electricity, are you guys thinking about how to help deploy clean energy solutions in Africa while supporting an energy transition?
Thank you. And to the point, so when you're a company that helps produce 25% of the world's energy in more than 100 countries, our mission is to really make sure that everyone has access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity. Every kid needs to turn the lights on to feel safe. Parents need to access their jobs. Everyone should have access to health care. So it's an imperative to us that we're making sure we're not just picking up the phone in the order in which it rings, but we're double-clicking on areas of the world who are struggling to meet the needs of affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity. About 800 million people in the world lack such access. Africa is an example of that. And so in our own sustainability framework, we're the first company to create this as a priority, to create electrification in emerging economies as a priority as part of our sustainability commitment. And when we think about Africa, we help provide 40% of Africa's needs for electricity through our technologies. We've been there for more than 100 years. It's our first market outside the United States. Almost 700 gas turbines, hundreds of wind turbines, and a full deployment of electrification equipment and software. But we have committed as a company through our sustainability framework and through specific leading goals to make sure that we are, not only as GE Vernova, but partnering with the public sector, partnering with my colleagues up here, and the private sector to make sure we're taking a holistic approach to places like Africa so that we meet that goal of every kid being able to turn the lights on, parents having access to do their jobs, access to health care, because energy really is prosperity, and we have to be very careful to make sure that we're not just, again, answering the phone in the order in which it rings, but we're really deep diving on areas of the world where we need to be more creative, employ more partnership, and Africa is a huge priority to do so.
Thank you so much. That's great. Let me turn next to Mike. Digitalization and automation are key aspects of the solutions that Emerson provides. How do you see that intersection between digital transformation and energy?
Yeah. First of all, thanks to everybody for the session this morning, and love my panelists, and we've met before, and
Good.
This really is an excellent group. I don't know if they realize what they got here. Mm-hmm. Emerson is a company focused on automation, globally active around the world. We serve all forms of power generation with sensors, control systems, valves, software capabilities. We love the nuclear field. We support your team in that. We love what you guys do. We support you on your turbines and those types of things. But it's been really interesting, I think, is to be able to take digitalization now and some of these new solutions that are coming to the forefront in clean energy. Hydrogen, of course, is a space people are looking at as a carrier of energy. Hydrogen's a challenging molecule to manage. We have history working at the backsides of refineries and some other operations, but now deploying hydrogen in a way that's in around our communities, it's in the public, being able to generate or manufacture the hydrogen, move it in safe ways, and of course the development and evolution of all the use cases for hydrogen. And we have a full complement of sensors, valves, control systems, and most importantly probably the modeling and the digitalization and the planning and the optimization that will come through working in those fields. I also want to highlight that batteries have also become very important in the grid management, grid stability sector. We've been fortunate to be able to provide the controls and software for almost all of the leading battery installations so far. I think the largest now is approaching a gigawatt or 4 gigawatt hours of storage capability. Again, pairing that with the less reliable or the intermittent forms of energy, generally I would think solar and wind, creates, again, another opportunity to strengthen the grids that we have as we go forward. So really great to be there. We need to attract talent to the space. I want to add that as kind of a commentary here. There's talent all over the world. We need them to come to work in these sectors. They need to come help us promote the digital transformation of these sectors, drive the clean energy transition, and again, being at the forefront of that. And Emerson's really trying to be a leader amongst all the communities that we're serving around the world from the educational standpoint. So
that's a great add. Anything else you would care to share about what you're doing in Latin America to focus on decarbonizing
Latin
energy?
America is interesting. Of course, they hold some of the goods that we need to decarbonize. They have great lithium and mining capabilities that the world's depending on to really help with electrification as we move forward. So some great projects there. You know, I appreciate the Latin American companies. They are sustainability minded first. They know that they have a great responsibility to be managing that way. Again, we try to bring the automation that allows them to operate safely, both for themselves and in the communities that they're serving. So great activity on that front. I'd say they're also deploying clean solar and wind assets out there in terms of making those happen. There's great showcases there. And I think they've been leaning forward and leaning into this. I think COP30 next year in Brazil, there'll be a great taking the inventories and what have been committed and where they're at in their investments at that point in time. Kind of look forward to that conversation.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Matt, on to you. Methane abatement is critical to meet global climate goals, including those under the Global Methane Pledge, of course. And U.S. companies are leaders in deploying those solutions. So can you tell us more about how Baker Hughes is working with oil and gas producers in Eurasia to reduce methane emissions?
Sure, and thank you again for the invitation and for the partnership over the years with ITA and USTDA and Exim Bank and all of the tools that the U.S. government provides to those of us doing business abroad. So Baker Hughes is an energy technology company with a strong heritage in oil and gas. We have a diversified new energy portfolio as well, which includes carbon capture, inclusive of direct air capture, hydrogen, distributed clean power, geothermal, and other low to net zero carbon energy solutions. But we really do continue to come back to the need to decarbonize the existing energy sector. So if you look specifically at methane emissions as a focus for the oil and gas sector, you're talking about roughly 35% of global methane emissions being attributable to those operations. Of that 35%, we think at least 40% is capable of being addressed with existing technology at no net cost to the operator. And where you have a convergence of the need to drive methane emissions down, plus known technologies, plus a demonstrated return on invested capital over time, you would think that the argument makes itself, but it doesn't, of course. And it doesn't for a few reasons. One of which is that the return on invested capital isn't always obvious to the operator whose fundamental mission is to produce energy for, in the case of many emerging developing markets in Eurasia, they're state-owned enterprises. And so their first priority is the delivery of reliable domestic energy to the people of the country in which they're financed and contribute to state coffers. So showing that return on invested capital, showing that the incremental projects is something that could be achieved either through modest contributions to your balance sheet or structured fundamentally off balance sheet, is something that takes time and effort to do. And that's why, despite the fact that it's 35% of global emissions and 45% of those are addressable, only 1% of finance in the methane abatement space is actually going to incremental methane reduction from these kind of emissions. So our priority, and it's I think a shared priority with the U.S. government, has been not only to develop the groundswell of support through commitments like the Global Methane Pledge, but also to increase the understanding of the underlying technologies, the business models, and the financial vehicles that are available for state-owned enterprises in particular to finance and undertake these projects without distracting from their fundamental mission, which is to provide reliable energy. And that is something where you lay a lot of foundation, and then you start to see over the course of years some momentum in terms of actual projects. And so, we got our start in Iraq, where we have one large flare recovery project that, again, was supported by the U.S. government, and more in the pipeline. We will be announcing this afternoon a flare recovery project associated with a very large refinery in Eurasia that will be the first project of its kind in this region to demonstrate how you can, I don't want to say easily because nothing is easy, but how you can incorporate methane reduction into your existing business model in a way that's integrated with operations and seamless for your underlying mission of creating energy. And that's to the point that Mike and Roger have already made. Fundamental to our approach here, we're not looking to tear down existing infrastructure or tear down existing models. We're looking to make incremental improvements that contribute towards net zero without delaying energy production.
That's great. And could you share as a follow-up any more information on geothermal? You didn't really touch too much on that. And especially, I guess you have this investment in Greenfire Energy, a California-based company?
Yeah, so geothermal is near to my heart. We've been in geothermal for decades. It is, again, an incredibly attractive resource. And much like shale before it, from a shale gas perspective, it is a resource where, with the application of new technologies, you can see step changes in the amount of the underlying resource that's available for economic production. And so conventional geothermal in the United States, to use a single market, we've got 40 gigawatts of conventional geothermal, of which we produce 4 gigawatts today. If you were to use enhanced geothermal, which is a slight modification to the way that you construct the wellbores for geothermal, you're talking not about 40 gigawatts, you're talking about 5 terawatts. If you add super hot rock to that, you're going even further. So are you going to produce 5 terawatts of electricity from geothermal in the United States? Maybe, but probably not. But even if you're talking about a fraction of that, and then again, compared to what we know from oil and gas development, a fraction of that is going to unlock millions upon millions of households worth of equivalent clean energy that is reliable, 24/7, base load, no carbon. And so that's the kind of technology that Greenfire is in. So Greenfire combines enhanced geothermal with a closed loop system that allows them to retrofit existing geothermal production for this. And while the U.S. has led the way in both demonstrating this technology, investing in the new incremental technology that we need, it's also led the way in exporting the concepts that underlie this kind of geothermal opportunity. And so we've worked with the U.S. government in markets like Indonesia, where we hold the first U.S. company license to develop geothermal in the country, and that was a direct result of technology exchange, capacity building, and other support that the U.S. government lent through the bilateral energy dialogue and the GTEP for Indonesia. We're doing the same thing in the Philippines, in Kenya, for example, where there's a mature conventional geothermal, but we think there's a lot more to be done. And in this region, again, we will have an announcement today around reservoir characterization for a large country in Eurasia. There's a tremendous amount of untapped geothermal potential of all kinds, conventional and emerging enhanced geothermal in the Caspian region, in Turkey, in Azerbaijan, for example, et cetera. And so we're looking forward to getting through some of those opportunities, because you are going to see a step change in the amount of baseload clean power that's available if we learn how to produce this geothermal energy.
Great, thank you. And then last but not least, Rick, I think many of us are in the audience are probably familiar with UL's testing and certification of products, but I understand that UL Solutions does a lot more in the sustainability space. So we were hoping you could share more about how you're supporting the deployment of climate solutions globally, and anything else you want to share about your organization. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me here. Many thanks to USTDA and Department of Commerce and EXIM. My name is Rick Ziegler, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here today. So you might know UL Solutions for product testing and certification, as Heather noted. In the first half of the 20th century, as part of the electrification evolutions, I think I've stolen that phrase now from Roger. I hope that was well said. So we tested and certified dishwashers, TV sets, vending machines. More recently, a lot more has been added to the mix. So we simulate hailstorms on solar panels. We simulate feet on solar panels. We drop mobile phones. We set batteries on fire. Our laboratories are a lot of fun to tour. I recommend it. Companies send us samples. We test and destroy them and then report back. So UL Solutions is at the forefront of de-risking new clean energy solutions. We work with innovators to apply science to ensure that their ideas are safe and effective. This accelerates and helps scale the positive impact for both safety and sustainability objectives. But we do a lot more. So we help companies bring transparency to their sustainability performance. And I'll break this down into two categories that most of you are familiar with. First, in contrast to product testing and certification, we also assess product-level sustainability claims like verified recycled content and product carbon footprint. We recently expanded that product carbon footprint, or PCF, program. Secondly, we provide customers with enterprise-level ESG assurance and data verification. We've been supporting ESG reporting for over 20 years. We help collect, compile, and interpret material ESG data, including GHG emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3, alongside staying in front of policies and regulations at the global scale. So the same trust and confidence born from our product testing are now in demand for sustainability data and claims. Because we're born out of certification rigor, governed by international standards, we apply similar rigor to all our sustainability-related services. We're helping companies build confidence with their numbers and strengthen their reputations. We're really an enabler for this electrification evolution, one after another. And I'll pause there and hand it back to Heather. So yeah, more than product testing and certification, and batteries play a very big role in that right now, especially as we get into grid scale.
I did have a follow-up for you on something that you're doing, supporting wind power feasibility study for Indonesia, and it sounds like U.S. Trade and Development Agency provided a grant for that. Can you share more about that project and anything else you're doing in the Asia Pacific?
Yes, so we have several partnerships with the U.S. government. Heather mentioned one. So first on the USTDA recently awarded Medco Power Indonesia, I want to get this right, for a 111 megawatt wind farm feasibility study in Indonesia. Our UL Solutions renewables team in the Asia Pacific is providing advisory services to Medco Power. The project will look at anticipated electricity output, grid integration, environmental and social risks. We also have experts collaborating with USTDA on Power Africa. And third example that I've got on my sheet here is we're co-leading APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, energy transition projects with the U.S. Department of Energy. And as part of this, we'll hold a microgrid and DC power workshop. This is an opportunity for me to put a plug in. If anyone's interested in learning more, we'll be holding a workshop on microgrid and DC power this February where APEC is being hosted by Korea. It'll be the first senior officials meeting for sure, potentially another during the 2025 host year. If anyone's interested in learning more, please do get in touch with me.
Great, thank you. Appreciate all those kind of opening comments. We have about 5 minutes for questions. So I guess I'd be curious. I'm looking at the potential questions. I think one that I would like to get everyone's perspective on is, when you are looking at all these countries that everyone's engaging with, we discussed, where do you see those countries heading in the next decade or 20 years as we're all moving towards these net zero emissions goals? And what role do you think the private sector should play in making sure everybody stays on track? Any thoughts about kind of the vision out another decade or 2 decades? Whoever wants to start. Roger, who wants to start?
I'll jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
Start small, then the big will show up. I think a couple thoughts if we go 10 years out in terms of what we're looking at, especially maybe in the emerging market areas. Obviously, there's demand for increased levels of energy in totality, and all of these countries are trying to figure out and sort their way through how they're going to make that happen. I think there are many that would love for them to go like green hydrogen, nirvana, end-use case styles, but the transition really doesn't practically work that way. We've got to keep hitting these stepping stones as we kind of move through our way, so that we can keep the economics somewhat in balance and still get the clean energy transition to happen. So I think we're going to still see a lot of gas being deployed in lieu of coal. Still the number one thing we can do in the moment to get the reductions that we need and still provide some stability in the power grids that are out there. But I think going forward, there's a lot of opportunity for optimization, energy efficiency, using digitalization, and then moving these countries into these assets that I think can be helpful down the road. Again, solar, wind maybe are the obvious ones with renewable activities. But I love the concept of geothermal. I love the concept of small modular reactors. And I would think within 10 years, we should be able to showcase those. As we built them, we could showcase them, and then hopefully figure out the way to proliferate them at a cost that these economies can jump into them.
Who's next?
Heather, very briefly, I would add to that. And the way we think about the electrification imperative is here. We are going to help these countries electrify, get them the access they need. But every dollar you spend on electrification is a dollar spent on decarbonization in our modern era. And I think that's something we need to embrace and not be scared of. This is actually this electrification super cycle we're headed into is kind of this once in a lifetime opportunity to not only bring prosperity because of energy, but also address this challenge of climate change. And so just by our own example, so last year in 2023, we put 29 gigawatts of capacity onto the grid. The carbon intensity of that capacity was 25% below the grid as a whole. So as we're putting more capacity on the grid, we're actually improving the trajectory of climate change at the same time. So we have so much opportunities, emerging economies, to do both of those things. Electrify, but use that as a chance to invest in infrastructure. You go with gas, you bring on renewables, you invest in the grid, bring in these breakthrough technologies, and you're solving for both at the same time.
Great.
I'm just going to violently agree with Mike and Roger on this. I mean, energy efficiency and a focus on carbon intensity of incremental energy electricity coming online is key. I think that we cannot be paralyzed by the fact that energy demand is going to continue to rise and we need to hit net zero by 2050. We have to embrace incremental reductions in the carbon intensity of the electrons that we produce and continue to deploy new technologies at speed. And so I think that the U.S. has done an excellent job of showing how technological innovation can unlock the ability to meet energy security, reliability, affordability, and sustainability, all of those things at the same time. But we have to show the way to build out to meet new energy demand in a way that is all of those things too. And that's going to mean not making the perfect the enemy of the good, and embracing, as Mike said, the global role of gas to meet new energy and to create energy efficiency and carbon intensity opportunities through fuel switching. But then we also need to make sure that we're building out a lower carbon grid in the ways that we've all talked about up here.
Great. Any thoughts from you, Rick?
Sure. Yeah, I would step back for a second on the private sector. Before I came here, I read I did not read completely, but I looked through the sustainability reports of my co-panelists' companies. They're all different and they're all inspiring. I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we'll keep seeing innovation in how we define and track sustainability. I think that could be to our benefit. As we're learning from each other through a diversity of approaches, and that would be the first point I'd make is just to see that, to see that innovation in how we do things continue. But I would add to that, I think a couple of things really specific. I think our policy makers need to build trust that their policies are reducing emissions, right? If we're going to do border carbon adjustments globally, we need to make sure they're working. And I think they will. But we have to track that. We have to have metrics. And the job for statisticians, I think, is no easy task here. There's a lot of confounding variables. I'd also bring up a really pragmatic thing, which is 2016, we saw the failure of the WTO Environmental Goods Agreement negotiations. I'm not saying we should reboot that. But I do think there might be some smaller pragmatic steps we could take, and perhaps that's to take a look at APEC's little mini environmental goods agreement, maybe extend it and mirror it at OECD. There's some precedent for doing things like that. I'd be keen to work with folks to take a look at that. And then the third thing I'd say is just managing risk. So we can't move forward with sustainability, I don't think, without safety hand in hand. When we move forward with a new energy transition technology and there are safety incidents associated with it, we have to avoid that. It's not just the reputation of the companies at stake. It's really, I think, the reputation of the energy transition. And there's a lot at stake there. So we need to move forward, I think, concertedly and with safety at top of mind. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. I think we hit a lot of key themes in the short time we had together, so I appreciate everyone. I want to invite Mr. Eric Hochshausen, I think I said that right, to close us out. He's the Senior Advisor for Climate Partnerships and Innovation with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, which several of us have already mentioned. So welcome you to the stage to close us out.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather, and thank you to the panelists for the really interesting conversation, all the great examples that you're providing here in the discussion. And a big thanks to ITA for organizing this panel. It's clear to all of us that this is a moment of risk and opportunity for the United States, for American industry, and for our partner countries overseas. Faced with the existential threat of climate change and bolstered by the support provided by the Inflation Reduction Act, businesses in the United States are innovating rapidly to develop new low and zero emissions clean energy technologies and to develop new solutions that will help communities adapt to growing threats from extreme weather, sea level rise, heat, and drought. We haven't heard as much about the resilience side today, but that's also an important part of the equation. In this discussion, we've heard a variety of solutions presented. And we know that no single tool or technology is going to solve all of the problems caused by climate change. In short, we're going to need a variety of solutions and a lot of innovation. And what you've heard today is that U.S. companies are providing that innovation and that they're eager to deploy these technologies around the world in emerging markets and other countries, not just in the United States. At USTDA, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, as the U.S. government's overseas project preparation agency, we're supporting this deployment with grants for feasibility studies, technical assistance, front-end engineering and design, or FEED studies, and pilot projects. And USTDA has had the opportunity to work with many of the companies that are up here on stage, and you heard about a couple examples. For example, the grant in West Sumbawa, Indonesia, to Medco Power Indonesia that UL is going to implement the feasibility study for. And you heard from Baker Hughes about the work that Green Fire Energy is doing in the Philippines, which USTDA is also supporting. I want to highlight, though, just briefly, another important thread, and I mentioned it already, which is climate resilience. And though mitigation is crucial and it requires our vigilant and urgent attention, decarbonization of energy systems is about more than just mitigation. And many of the solutions in this sector that you've heard about, some today, whether it's geothermal, battery storage, even SMRs, they're capable of assuring reliable and durable and resilient energy supply, which is part of building resilience. And that's important for communities that are most vulnerable to climate change as well. So this is not only a climate issue, but it's also a development issue. Another theme that we're talking about here at COP, and which I think this panel really well illustrates, is the importance of collaboration between the public and private sectors. It's very clear that public sector funding alone and public sector innovation alone is not going to be enough, will never be enough, to achieve our climate and development goals. That's why it's so important for the public and private sectors to work together. The private sector is a crucial partner. Their value is not just monetary. As we've seen here and heard here just now, they're also bringing a lot of innovation and expertise in deployment to the table. So we've heard a variety from our panel of a variety of technologies, and this is just one small sample of the many innovative, capable companies in the United States that are really eager to plunge into this space and already have deep and long track records of doing so. Within the U.S. government, agencies like USTDA and other agencies can act as an important bridge between the U.S. private sector and our international partners. And we recognize and actively foster our private sector partners' participation in promoting sustainable development. USTDA's project preparation support can assist U.S. companies in reaching international markets while also de-risking projects to make them more attractive to investors. So as you've seen here and heard, our project preparation tools and the partnership building tools that our colleagues at the Commerce Department bring are part of a larger U.S. government toolbox or tool set and ecosystem that's supporting infrastructure development overseas. And that also includes partner agencies like the U.S. Export-Import Bank that you heard from earlier, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and others. Globally, we're going to need an urgent and holistic approach to tackling climate change. Today, you've heard just from this small sample of U.S. companies that are bringing key expertise and innovation that offer value not just to the U.S. economy and American communities, but also for our trading partners, for communities in developing countries, and ultimately for the planet. So I want to thank again our panelists. I want to thank Director Hernstadt from Exim Bank. Thank you to our wonderful colleagues at ITA for their great partnership and for organizing this panel. And thanks to you in the audience for taking some time out of your schedules to be with us here today. And we wish you a successful COP in your time here in Baku. Thank you very much.
Please remember to return your headsets when you leave the U.S. Center. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for this event at the U.S. Center on how the IRA is driving investment internationally. I'm Bella Tonkanogi. I'm Senior Advisor in the U.S. Treasury's Climate Hub. We are an office that was set up by Secretary Yellen back in 2020, and we work to coordinate and advise on climate change issues across the agency. In 2022, as you all know, the United States Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the country's most significant climate legislation ever. And most of it is implemented through the U.S. tax code, which Treasury oversees. So we've had at the U.S. Treasury a very large and important role in implementing the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're really excited to lead this discussion today at COP on Finance Day on the links between the IRA and international investment. So without further ado, I will turn over to Ethan Zindler, who's Climate Counselor to the Secretary of the Treasury.
Thanks, Bella, and hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to COP. If this is your first day here, it's great to see all of you. As was mentioned, I'm the Climate Counselor at the Treasury Department, And I'm really pleased to be able to host this excellent panel today. This is kind of classic COP style. We're going to have some people come in a little bit late. We're going to have one person who's going to have to leave a little bit early, but that's okay. There's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of interesting topics to discuss. So as was mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, most important piece of climate and energy legislation ever passed in support of clean energy technologies in the United States. We've been working very hard on implementing it the last 2 years. We've been very pleased with the level of results that we've seen domestically. We've seen about $500 billion in new capital flows into clean energy technologies in the 24 months since the IRA was signed into law. But that's actually not really the point of today's conversation. What we want to talk today a bit about is some of the international opportunities that the IRA has created for export, for finance, for other types of things as well. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to have a great panel. We're going to have four panelists up here, me moderating. We're going to have one intervention, a person who's going to show up, and I'm going to hand them a mic for a minute. But we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, let me just quickly introduce our panelists. And as I do, you guys can just actually all come right up here and have a seat. So first is Lisa Jacobson, who's the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy right here. To her right is Joseph Nganga, the Vice President for Africa at the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet. To his right is Karen Fang, Managing Director and Global Head of Sustainable Finance at Bank of America. And to her right is Nishant Arya, the Vice Chairman of the JBM Group. I think, let's get right to it, and I'll put my headphones on so I can actually hear what you guys have to say. But maybe Lisa, if I could, I'll start with you. If you could talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that maybe first tell us a little about, obviously, what the BCSE is, but then second, what some of the opportunities the IRA has created for some of them outside of the United States.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with this excellent panel to talk about the impact of policy on market development. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy, we are a broad-based trade association focused on energy efficiency, renewable energy, natural gas, and deep decarbonization technologies. We've been a part of this forum since 1992. That's when we were founded as an organization, and our board, its first act, was to participate in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Process and the Rio Earth Summit. So it's really wonderful to be here, but for all those years of the organization, it has never had as strong a policy foundation at the federal level as we have today. And what's critical about it is that it's very broad-based. We're talking about market signals to so many different energy efficiency and clean energy technologies, and all based on the premise of public-private partnership. How do we leverage private sector capital towards the energy transition? So, Ethan asked about what the impact has been of the policy portfolio that we have, and including the Inflation Reduction Act. As he said, very quickly, once enacted, strong signals to invest, and that's what we have seen. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sectors that are not only serving a growing and expanding North American market, but are also looking outside to serve the global marketplace, because that's the opportunity. U.S. is a leader in so many energy transition technologies, and we have the opportunity to not only serve our own people and communities with modern, efficient, clean, and affordable energy resources, but we have the opportunity to take that around the world. And that's what we're seeing. Electrolyzer manufacturing, battery manufacturing, renewable energy scale up, heat pumps for electric and natural gas manufacturing, ready to serve the world. So these are the kinds of things that are happening both in our market, but getting ready to serve the market around the world. So happy to share more about the specifics of that in our Q&A later.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So let me bring Karen in here as well. I mean, I think obviously all these opportunities need financing. And so welcome your take from Bank of America's perspective in terms of the types of things that you're seeing internationally and new opportunities that have been created around the IRA.
Can you guys hear me? Great. Yes. So domestically, as Ethan said, the $500 billion clean energy investments in the last 2 years is unprecedented. Depending on which year you measure, it could be up 50 to 100% on an annual pace. So the momentum in the domestic market is driving a lot of the international export-import activities in terms of global supply chain and global demand signals. So we can talk about the U.S., but, one thing before I get into sort of international markets and, direct investments in the United States in the area of carbon dioxide removal, DAC, battery manufacturing, and solar component manufacturing. Clearly, those incentives were there, so projects that didn't really pencil before obviously now can reach FID, right? Final investment decision, and the dollars start flowing there. When you think about, exporting, I mean, we actually helped a large company, small startup several years ago becoming larger and larger by the day because of the incentives, obviously, that are put in place for SAF, sustainable aviation fuels and e-fuels, and now they can export into Europe and other markets. So there is an impact on import-export, but I think it will be fair to say a lot of the impact is felt in domestic communities, domestic markets, right? We're definitely seeing a manufacturing renaissance in the United States. Jobs are created, community development has been accomplished. 45X, if you care to know the tax code of an advanced manufacturing tax credits, probably surprised many of us on Wall Street, where we're just seeing the uptake of those credits for long duration energy storage, for components of renewable energy and batteries for EV and so on and so forth. So those are good things to talk about, because I don't think climate is a climate problem on its own. Climate at its roots is a human, climate crisis is a human crisis, a health crisis, it's a community crisis. So when we can think about green growth and green jobs and green community revitalization with health benefits attached to it, that is a win-win for the people and the planet. So when you think about that, the export-import trends we're seeing, right? Hey, reducing the green premium here, leveraging the IRA incentives, making it cheaper for the rest of the world so we could actually export into other markets. Some of the work that we're doing with the government in terms of DFC, looking at critical mineral mining and supply chain, and making sure we have diversification of supply chain, security and affordability in the supply chain. Those financing work, catalyzed by many of the incentives and de-risking mechanism that the government is putting in place, I think have really caused some of the probably, much needed diversification in that global value chain that we want to see. So there's a lot of great work that has been done the last couple of years. I mean, from a business community standpoint, it's always about talking less and doing more. Things that make sense need to continue, and the momentum should not be lost.
Thanks so much, Karen. And you mentioned people on the planet, so you gave me a good opportunity to segue into Joseph from the Global Energy Alliance for People on the Planet. And Joseph, I also know you need to roll a little bit early, so I want to make sure we get you in here quickly. Tell us a little bit about GAP and some of the work that you're doing, and then also how the IRA has created some opportunities, particularly in the region that you're focused on.
Thank you very much. So GAP is the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, created by large philanthropy, Bezos, Rockefeller, and IKEA, to drive electrification in the global south, but do so with clean energy and ensure that the electrons are used to create jobs and therefore economic development. I lead our work in Africa, so I'll talk mostly about Africa. And IRA is incredibly exciting and important for the region for 3 reasons. One is technology. Our market, our region, does not have the technical, financial, ecosystem depth to do a lot of the innovation that is needed to drive new technologies in the climate space. Everything from green hydrogen, as you talked about, electrolyzers, to battery energy storage with new chemistries and so on. So by the U.S. providing the tax incentive to U.S. companies to create these new technologies, we benefit by getting cheaper technologies a lot more efficiently. The second is existing technologies. So if you think about the continent, our large resources in solar, in wind, in hydro, will only be harnessed if there is adequate demand. That demand includes things like green hydrogen, but we don't have the ability to develop the value chains for this. And if we were to base a business case on current demand for green hydrogen on the continent, it wouldn't work. But by leveraging the demand that's coming from industrialized countries, we're able to make investments in the renewable energy space to generate green hydrogen because there is demand. There's a captive market. And we're seeing that in everything from industries to shipping and so on. So we benefit from the demand that is being created for these renewable technologies. And thirdly, and this is a wish list mostly, is we need to extend these benefits to the companies who are investing on the continent so that they are incentivized to do some of this work in Africa that benefits the US. I'll give you an example. An electron used to manufacture hospital beds in the US is suboptimal. The US should be spending their electrons on AI, on new innovation, and so on. You should leave the hospital beds to us. But to do that, we need American investors to come to the continent and do so. The AGOA has provided the overall framework. So companies who invest in Africa to export to the US have the ability to do so with lots of tax benefits. So we need to go one step further and say that American companies who invest in electricity to support AGOA manufacturing on the continent benefit from the same tax incentives as they're getting in the US. So they're not only staying in the US, they're bringing the expertise and resources to the continent. I hope we can do that soon. And then the last thing I will say...
Can I just interrupt and ask, do you mind clarifying what AGOA is for those who may not know?
Sorry?
Could you just clarify what AGOA is?
So AGOA, I don't know what the acronym means, but I know that it's the US saying that Africa can ship Africa-manufactured products, including hospital beds, the jeans you buy at... Where do you buy your jeans? Yeah. You can export them to the US with low tax and therefore incentivize manufacturing in Africa, which is critical to ensuring we're driving industries on the continent. And then I was going to conclude by saying that there's a lot of noise around the new administration. What I will say to that is we feel that irrespective of who's in government, the horse has bolted the stables. Renewable energy today is competitive. Green aluminum is in demand. Green steel is in demand. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I know that the thinking today is, again, if you're going to use your electrons efficiently, you should keep some things in the US and then allow the rest of the world to do the rest of the manufacturing. And so I don't see it as a big challenge if we use the right mindset. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. And you started to answer what might even sort of be my second question, so I appreciate that as well. But I want to bring Nishant into the conversation. Nishant, tell us a little bit about your company and the work that you do and some of the opportunities the IRA has created.
So we focus primarily on electric vehicles, energy, storage, lithium batteries, power electronics, charging systems, renewable energy, waste to energy, circular economy, SAF, green gas. So primarily all areas connected to sustainability. And we have been working now with different American companies in multiple formats. So like for our semiconductor requirements, we work with multiple American technologies from NXPs to NVIDIAs to others in the world. And I think that's been a really big game changer in terms of giving us a fillip for best-in-class technology, most efficient products for our power electronics. And we are exporting across the world because we have a presence across 37 countries today where we manufacture across Europe, North America, Africa, Middle East, our global headquarters in India, Southeast Asia, up to Australia. So idea is clearly that how with IRA, I think with the focus on sustainability and zero emission technologies where we are present, how one could export and bring in the right set of products using the best-in-class technology in the US and seeing that how such products are having multiple life cycles because today with energy storage, energy transition becoming a very big focus area, I think there are some big opportunities at hand where people are looking at the first life cycle electric vehicles for lithium batteries, but beyond the first life cycle, second life cycles on energy storage and power backup could also be very fruitful, not requiring the batteries to be recycled but repurposed for different applications, giving them a 20-year plus life cycle. So we are doing many such different applications and technologies. And there is a big alignment possible where globally competitive products can be manufactured at scale in US with a clear roadmap. So I feel that today the IRA is very beneficial in terms of giving a clear roadmap and understanding what different cities and states could do, but institutionalizing and making it connected to the ground realities and executing in that manner, I think would be a big game changer going forward. Parallelly, bringing in different partnerships which US has today as a part of IRA, I think has given it a very strong boost, which I believe in the next few years, and I totally agree with what you said, that irrespective of who's there, on a TCO basis, total cost of ownership basis, it makes a lot of sense that it's not fashionable to have sustainability being a part of everyone's portfolio, but I think it makes a lot of business sense, and sustainability driving scalability is something which is very essential in my view. So how can we think global, act local in this perspective is something which is very important in my view. Yeah.
Thanks so much, and really good points. I like I'm going to steal from you sustainability driving scalability. And I would argue it goes the other way as well, ultimately. So we have a bonus panelist, but we don't have a chair. So classic COP style, I'm going to just invite him up to the mic. This is Danny Morris from the Climate Investment Funds. And the CIF has been really one of the leading players and interesting players in doing innovative financing in emerging markets and developing economies. And Danny's going to just give his quick answer to my question, but also talk a little bit about what CIF is doing.
Thanks, Ethan. Can you guys hear me okay? It's a pleasure to be here today. As a former Treasury alum working on climate, this is a bit of a full circle moment. So I'm very glad to be here talking to you about what Climate Investment Funds is doing in this space. And in particular, the IRA has obviously had many impacts, but one that it's had for us is a bit of a mindset shift. The U.S. has been the biggest contributor to the CIF over the years at about $3 billion in contributions. And about 2 years ago, when we were developing an industry decarbonization program, we started speaking with colleagues from the U.S., and they brought up the idea of what's possible with green supply chains. And it's something that we had always had in the back of our mind, but hadn't really known that there was a lot of appetite to pursue. For those of you who don't know us, Climate Investment Funds, we are a fund that is built to service the multilateral development banks, to provide concessional finance to them, to push them beyond where they feel comfortable, make their capital a little bit more powerful, and get into spaces that require a bit of innovation, that maybe need a little bit of risk. Clean technology supply chains is obviously one of those areas, and with new contributions from the U.S., we saw an opportunity with our industry decarbonization program to really expand the meaning and look at the whole spectrum of industry decarbonization. So not only looking at high-emitting industrial sectors and how we can decarbonize those supply chains, maybe can we look at industries that will help decarbonization. So now our program is built to allow countries to make initial investments in wind, solar, battery, electrolyzer supply chains. We have a very wide window of opportunities here, and we're asking countries and MDBs to work together to bring their most creative solutions to us and to see what our concessional finance can do for them. A call for proposals for the program went out in October. That's open until January 17th, and so developing countries will have an opportunity to kind of put together their best case in the industry space, and we'll see kind of what opportunities arise from that. I'll just also make a quick plug for a new innovation that we think will fuel this work, which is with the support of the U.S. this week we were able to establish the CIF capital markets mechanism by having it listed on the London Stock Exchange. This mechanism will allow CIF, in the first time for a multilateral climate fund, to go to capital markets, issue a bond, to take those bond revenues and turn them around as concessional finance for countries to execute projects through the MDBs. So because of the CCMM's launch, our industry program is capitalized at about $1 billion right now, which we expect to deploy to 4 to 6 countries, depending on the type of proposals that we see. And so we see a huge opportunity for clean technology supply chains to really establish a foothold in developing countries, start to build that domestic capacity to sort of mimic some of the benefits that IRA has brought to the U.S. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Danny, and we'll get a seat for you shortly. I think when I know Joseph has to go, but so let's Joseph, you raised the potential for. You talked a little bit about momentum, and I think we wouldn't be doing this justice if we didn't talk a little about the potential for change in the future. And so maybe I'll start with you, Lisa. As you look into next year and some of the conversations that are at least being talked, some of the things that are at least being talked about regarding the IRA, do you have concerns about changes, and what are the potential implications for the industries that are part of your organization?
Well, as we said in the beginning, I mean, the historic policy foundation we have at the federal level with the IRA and the tax regime being the center of it, it has revolutionized investment in our sector, and that is not going to change. And I think back on the years of having tax policy to support renewable energy, to support energy efficiency. You go back 3 decades on a bipartisan basis. Those types of policies have been supported, and I think they are supported because they are driving jobs, economic opportunity. They're keeping the U.S. at our, competitive front footing, and we don't want to lose that, and we have no reason to. And, the private sector is taking on a lot of risk when you use the tax code, and we are leveraging significant private sector dollars. So, we're going to continue to discuss the economic benefits on the ground of the tax policies we have. And, I feel very confident these investments are going to continue. What we're doing is we're revolutionizing the domestic market in the United States. We're building out supply chains, which is critical for our success. We're creating a workforce for the future. And, we're improving communities. They are getting access to modern and affordable energy services. And we also look out on the horizon and we see energy demand rising. We see manufacturing coming back. We see opportunities with digitalization and AI. We see electrification. The energy sector is never been a more exciting place to be working right now, and I'm feeling very optimistic. So, we need all the technologies that the IRA is supporting and really driving private capital into those markets, which is what the IRA does with its tax provisions, is the model that we need to keep.
Thanks, Lisa. And Joseph, maybe I'll give you a chance because I know you've got to go. I mean, you expressed optimism about the sort of momentum around these technologies. What gives you such optimism?
I think the optimism for me comes from seeing what's happening on the ground. The reality today is solar, wind, hydro, battery energy storage are delivering affordable power to communities on the continent in a scale that has not been possible before. Because with solar panels now and a battery, you can serve a rural community of 100,000 people effectively. And you can only do that because you also have demand side of that power. So you're replacing two-wheelers, motorcycles, three-wheelers, tuk-tuks, with electric ones. So the electrons have a demand, and you're replacing an existing cost with a new solution that is actually more affordable. So the economics are beginning to speak for themselves. What also gives me a lot of optimism is I imagine that anybody leading in the U.S. has U.S. best interests at heart, and therefore they will optimize for what's best for the U.S. and allow everybody else to do their part. And what is that? It is being innovative, it's driving new solutions, new technologies in a way that others can't. It's staying competitive and ahead of everybody else. The U.S. already has that capability. Through IRA, those incentives, you're allowing companies to take more risks, you're allowing them to innovate, which is a uniquely American opportunity. And then the flip side of it is what will happen if you don't. China and other countries will get ahead of the U.S. So anybody who understands this and it has the U.S. best interests at heart will continue to incentivize innovation, and the rest of the world will benefit from it. So that gives me a lot of hope and optimism.
Thanks for that. Karen, want to bring you in as well. I mean, financial markets, investors, uncertainty is, let's say, your biggest enemy to some degree. What concerns might you have looking into next year regarding some of these programs?
I think policy stability is very important. Longevity is important because a lot of the projects we're financing are, 20, 30 years. And you're thinking about building a new, hydrogen plant or renewable energy plant, and the useful life is very long, right? So clearly, I agree, right? Certain technologies in the mature decarbonization space like wind and solar and battery storage, EVs, these are commercially competitive, right? Solar plus storage is the cheapest source of power generation in 90% of the world. So when there is business sense, things will continue. The momentum will not be lost. Perhaps the returns will be a little bit lower if the credits go away, right? You have to prepare for all cases. I mean, that's what business people do. Base case, bear case, bull case. When you think about it, those things can stand on its own 2 feet, right? So those things will continue to get the funding. The scale will increase. The price will come even cheaper. Clearly, we have maybe a short-term blip because we have to rebuild some of the supply chain and diversify supply chain. So solar components, wafers, things will get built up. But once they're built up, you will have the global scale. It will continue to drive the economy of scale, and then cost will come down, right? And that benefits the entire world. Renewable energy, I mean, at COP28, we talked about triple up renewable energy, but now given the AI demand, we perhaps have to triple up even more. But when you think about baseload, what we don't want to see is coal plant extending, a lot of combined cycle gas plants coming online without abatement, without phase out in mind. We want to make sure nuclear, right? Nuclear is, in IRAs have 45U incentives. You look at nuclear is 20% of the U.S., grid. So we are ahead. We're actually the number one country in terms of nuclear power generation, in terms of total installed capacity, right? So when you think about baseload power, nuclear baseload, I mean, ideal scenario, low carbon scenario will be nuclear baseload plus renewable energy and storage, and intermittency will come down over time. So things like that make sense when businesses actually plan for decades and centuries. We don't plan for 4-year cycles, and projects are multi-decade long, and you don't get to just abandon a project and firing every worker you have ever hired and start rebuilding something else. So I think the continuity and the momentum will not be lost in things that make sense. I think in areas of the emerging technologies that were catalyzed a lot by the Inflation Reduction Act, those are clearly at more risk, right? Because the green premiums in SAF, it could be, depending on the company that's building the SAF plants, I mean, it could be anywhere between 3 to 5 times more expensive than jet fuel. The incentives took care of a lot of that. Hydrogen, right? Advanced manufacturing. So a lot of these things are more at risk. I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But, the belief on Wall Street is that things that create jobs in all communities, red and blue, things that create community development, economic development, will continue to have the support, bipartisan support, to continue, because those things are generating a tremendous amount of economic benefit for the country, and hopefully for the technology sectors that are maturing as well. So those things are a little bit more, because it doesn't make commercial sense today. It is just more expensive. But I think, one of the hopes that we had was IRA was catalyzing the U.S. investment into those deeply, and I would say really needed technologies that we were going to lead the way to help reduce the green premium for the rest of the world. And I think you talked about that point as well. So that momentum will hopefully continue, right? But that's the tougher area, because that isn't naturally where the capital is going. Emerging markets, lastly, I think that's where blended finance, a lot of the things that we're all talking about through the World Bank. I mean, obviously there's a lot of discussions around the multilateral development banks and development finance institutions, because, the global climate is a global issue, right? And carbon dioxide doesn't discriminate where it is. I mean, the climate severity is increasing everywhere. It's not just in emerging markets versus developed countries. So I do think that program, right, if DFC, continues its work on global supply chain, global value chain, we'll continue to see investments into the global south. And that benefits, again, it's a win-win situation. So hopefully those programs will continue as well.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Joseph, for joining us. That was a great answer, very complete. And I appreciate you also sort of parsing out the difference between commercialized technologies and the new technologies. And it is a really fair point that these new technologies obviously are incredibly important as we think about wanting to address climate change comprehensively, and that we haven't made as much progress on some of those industrial technologies as we really do need to. Nishant, I want to bring you back into the conversation, though. You're a global company, obviously, and you have lots of places you can do business. Do you have any concerns? Does it change your thinking about the U.S. in any way, given the potential for change in the U.S. around the IRA?
I think one big change, which definitely would be essential for making IRA a lot more effective, is that from a product or a service standpoint, it should start capturing an ecosystem perspective. So starting from, let's say, if I take one segment of renewable or EV generation to consumption, so starting from generating solar power or hydro or wind to charging to energy storage to electric vehicles, and also capturing the required technology, skilling, and everything, so that IRA is not addressing anything in isolation, but everything is being addressed holistically at an ecosystem level. Because what happens is, at times, and majority of the places, people don't look at skilling, but the disposable income and the kind of data analytics, the kind of know-how which gets generated from the new age technologies enhances the disposable income for people. So therefore, it brings in enhances the parity level quite substantially. And I think that is also one of the key objectives which is indirectly put across for the IRA, but is not getting captured in the ecosystem perspective. Parallelly, when you are looking at electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, if your generation is not green, then you are just pushing out the coal-based or gas-based power plants. So therefore, it becomes very important that you generate green, you consume green, and you are really focusing on building on green technologies. And you have a clear-cut program. Like, I'll give you an example of what we did in India, that the government developed a program of 500 gigawatt of renewable energy. On one hand, there's the electric mobility program on the other hand, there's a charging infrastructure program on the other hand, and the road infrastructure program on the other hand. All are interconnected and are delivering results on that in that manner. It may be driven by different people, but it's part of an integrated approach at an ecosystem level. So that's what drives a lot of interconnected outcomes as well, which you can map very clearly, and they can be really driven in a direction. So I think that is something which today is missing, is happening in bits and pieces, but if it's taken up in a concentrated manner, it would give substantially better results. Secondly, I see that consistency of the policy framework over the next 5 to 10 years, irrespective of who's there and who's not, I think that would go a long way in redefining the success of IRA, because that would give a lot of confidence for international investors to invest in the US, use it as their not only local but global manufacturing base. And thirdly, seeing that how you are seeing that certain technologies which are not core to the US, you are partnering with other countries, because that's also being driven by competitiveness and total cost of ownership, and seeing that how things are being done at a certain scale and size. So scale and size is given a preference over just distributing it in bits and pieces. MSMEs are a good part of integrated ecosystems, but they cannot lead the ecosystems. They need a support system for that to happen. So I think those 3 points would be my points, in addition to green capital and green infrastructure really being seen in a different manner for that to get primary focus for deployment in these areas.
Thanks so much. And Danny, we'll bring you back in here as well. Obviously, you guys, there's a lot of momentum. You just launched this opportunity for private markets to support the work that you do. Any concerns about a change in direction in terms of what it would mean for the opportunities that would be out there?
Yeah, I'd say we have been sort of previewing this mechanism for a number of months. We've done roadshows in Europe, a little bit in US and Canada, and the interest in this type of mechanism is really big. Investors are excited at the opportunity. They like the story. They trust the multilateral development banks, the World Bank, the big regional banks, the International Finance Corporation, our main implementing entities. And a lot of them sort of understand the need for this kind of thing. and it gives them an opportunity to get into a new area of investment that they haven't really seen before. But it also gives them the certainty of what they can expect from MDBs. And I think a really interesting aspect of what we're offering is helping to define things like how do you track results and standards, right? Because we do get a lot of questions from investors. How can we ensure that this is that these are legit, that this is a high quality portfolio of investments that we can that we're buying into. And that stuff doesn't change with administration. That stuff doesn't really change with policy. It's the kind of thing that's expected no matter who is in charge. Our programs are expected to keep track of their impacts, whether that's greenhouse gas emissions, energy brought online, and with supply chains, that will be more challenging just because tracking those emissions is more challenging as you get into the supply chain space. But I think there is confidence from the investors that we've spoken with that these systems work, and these systems are not dependent on sort of year-to-year changes. They're things that we continue to build over time and will continue to evolve. So, yeah, I think it's the interest has been high, and we hope that it will continue to be high. And even if the markets get a little rattled, we expect that demand for this will remain.
So I'm conscious that we don't have a ton of time left, so sort of consider this somewhat of a lightning round question, which is, we originally framed this as thinking about, what's one dynamic you might want to see shift in the IRA? What's any improvements that you might want to see? But with 60 days left, roughly, in this administration, I guess this is a request for you. What are the last things that you would like to see us get done before we leave?
Well, I mean, clearly you're working on many fronts to finalize rules, and people want to see those as quickly as possible. We've very much appreciated the very thoughtful and elaborate process to provide input from the business community and other stakeholders into the design of the tax credit regime. So what we need now, though, is the rules of the road. So that's one thing. But I just wanted to make, in my lightning round, I just want to make one other comment we didn't talk about in terms of continuity. It's continuity of the market signals from consumers in the United States, consumers in North America, and consumers around the globe. That is what's driving this transformation at its core. The policies help us do it faster, they help us do it more affordably, and they expand access. And, for the U.S., we have such a competitive opportunity here to not only improve communities on the ground with jobs and economic development, but to also support communities around the world as they become our partners in these growing supply chains. So there you go.
Danny, what should I be working on when I get back to my desk?
Yeah, it's not going to be a creative answer. I have the same one as Lisa, which is rules and definitions, right? And in particular, because the way the U.S. sort of establishes benchmarks, it allows us in the international space when we're working with multilateral development banks and other countries to say, this is how it's being defined. In particular, Ethan, I know you guys have been working on the hydrogen rule quite a bit. Well, in our world, everyone is chomping at the bit to do green hydrogen this, green hydrogen that. And anytime I have a conversation with a country that's interested in investment, an MDB team that's like, we have this project, we want to do this, I can point to, say, this is how the U.S. is defining this. And so we need to think about how they're doing that in your context, right? There's also just sometimes preferences where the most bankable project in the short term may not be the best investment for a country in the long term. And with hydrogen on this in particular, I think that there's a whole pipeline of projects that might be dependent on exports of ammonia, for example. And we have a responsibility as we sort of work with countries and MDBs to say, how does that make sense sort of beyond just a short-term horizon? Because we have concessional resources that can make something that's not currently bankable more bankable. And the rules of the road that are established by the U.S. really help us define that conversation. So, yeah, keep writing those rules.
It's hard to pick one thing. You got to go really, really fast. And you got to codify, I think, certain things. I mean, IRA wasn't just about the tax credits, right? It was about the clean energy demonstration grants. It was about the loan guarantee programs. Again, a lot of that was expand what is commercial, perhaps, but can be even more commercial and cheaper and affordable for all people. And two is really catalyzing those technologies that International Energy Association say we need for decarbonization, which will reduce climate severity, right, in all events that we're seeing and really combat a lot of the human impact and health impact that we're all feeling. So those, you know, I think I won't repeat what you both said, but you have to clarify 45E, 45Z, right? Get those things clarified so we have rules, you know, playbook going forward and affecting international standards on what we define as green hydrogen versus blue hydrogen and so on and so forth. Is hour by hour matching really necessary on renewable generation for green hydrogen production? So without getting too wonky, I think we need to have a pragmatic set of rules that you all can help us, you know, finalize and kind of written into law. And then transferability is a very good mechanism that brought in, right, technology companies, defense companies, consumer product companies, in addition to financial services, right? When you think about the tax equity market in the U.S., wind and solar was dominated by a bunch of banks, including us and Bank of America. That was a $25 billion market. Hundreds of billions of taxpayers on the corporate side have been brought into the clean energy investment by using transferability. You know, that has been a game changer on capital deployment. That's why you saw $500 billion. It's one of the main reasons that was so fast. Adoption and the implementation was so fast. So I really hope transferability is codified. It's really something that, you know, it's beneficial for the country, right? We can't have taxpayer dollars pay for these investments forever. We got to have, you know, commercial capital coming into the picture, and it's not just investors and pension funds and banks. It's also corporates that actually have a role to play. So the last thing I would say is, listen, you know, demand signal, as Lisa said, it's not just from consumers. 8,000 largest companies in the world have pledged to net zero. You know, I think it's all continents, you know, all geographies. That momentum won't stop. So when people want cheaper green electrons, they want cheaper green molecules, we better have it. So I do think that's in American interest as well, to make sure that we're stay competitive in a greening world that is moving forward with or without us.
Thanks, Karen. And for those who don't know, the tax code 45E is the one related to hydrogen, 45Z is the one related to biofuels, and transferability is the ability to allow tax credits within the United States to be sold on to other parties. Nishan, I'm going to give you a very quick last word, and then we're out.
No, I think what's clearly visible is that we all want to see that clearly how things become more and more objective and they become a lot more user-friendly for companies to really embrace the IRA, not only in U.S. but also international companies. Parallelly, how there's a clear level playing field which comes in because at times people do start feeling it's more for local companies. So I think that perspective needs to change a bit. And clearly, if you have a measurable monitoring program where you are setting targets for different states to meet those targets, drawing it down to the last dollar, and seeing and monitoring them across all technologies, maybe not one against the other, but whether it's EV or hydrogen or biofuels, amongst many others. So I think that would be the real outcome which we would look forward to. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And also thanks for reminding us about the importance of the state level action, which I think we're going to be thinking and talking a lot more about over the next several years. So thank you so much to all our panelists for these great comments. We covered, I feel like, a ton of ground in the last 45 minutes. And please join me just in saying thank you and thanks for joining us yourselves.
We loved having you join us at the U.S. Center. Please remember to return your headsets as you leave. Thank you for coming to the U.S. Center. We are now closed for lunch. Our next event will be at 1:15 p.m.